Everybody saw the headline. Kelsey Mitchell resigns with the Indiana Fever. 1 year, $1, $4 million. On the surface, it looked simple, clean, almost routine. But nothing about this is routine anymore. Not the number, not the timing, and definitely not the decision. Because in today's WNBA, a player at the absolute peak of her value doesn't just stay. She explores. She maximizes. She cashes in long-term security. So why didn't she? Why would a veteran, coming off one of the strongest stretches of her career, in a brand new financial era where salaries have exploded, choose a 1-year deal instead of locking in generational money? That's where the story begins to change. Because this wasn't just about a contract. This was a message. A signal about loyalty. About power. About something much bigger being quietly built inside Indiana around Caitlin Clark and Aaliyah Boston. And once you understand what Mitchell actually said after signing that deal, the entire narrative flips. When most athletes sign a massive contract, you already know the script. The social media post. The luxury dinner. The blessed caption. Agents celebrating historic numbers. Players talking about brand value, legacy, and market worth. It's a performance of success. And they've earned that. But Kelsey Mitchell? She didn't do any of it. No flashy rollout. No focus on the money. No victory lap. Instead, she started talking about people. She talked about conversations. About relationships. About teammates like they weren't just coworkers, but something closer to family. She mentioned Caitlin Clark. She mentioned Aaliyah Boston. She mentioned Lexi, Sophie. Names that don't show up in headlines, but clearly mattered in that room. And then she said something that should have made everyone stop. They talked about staying together. They talked about sacrifices. They talked about being what each other needed. Read that again. A veteran in her prime, who could have commanded offers across the entire league, who could have secured long-term financial stability, instead chose to stay because of conversations with a 20-something point guard and a young center about building something together. That's not business. That's belief. To understand why that matters, you have to go back. Back before the headlines. Before the sold-out arenas. Before the Caitlin Clark effect changed everything. Back to when Kelsey Mitchell first arrived in Indiana. She was the second overall pick. A scoring machine out of Ohio State. One of the most prolific players in college basketball history. She wasn't supposed to struggle. She wasn't supposed to wait. But that's exactly what happened. Her rookie contract? Roughly $232,000 total over 4 years. Not per season. Total. For a franchise cornerstone. For a player expected to carry an organization. She stepped into a team deep in rebuild mode. Empty seats. Losing seasons. Constant resets. And yet, she showed up. Every night. Scoring. Leading. Carrying. With no spotlight. No real payoff. No guarantee it would ever turn around. Most players in that position? They leave. They demand trades. They chase contenders. They protect their careers. Mitchell didn't. She stayed. Year after year. Loss after loss. 6 straight seasons without the playoffs. She stayed when staying made no sense. And then, just as things finally started to change, life hit harder than basketball ever could. In the middle of her best professional season, she lost her father. The man who built her game, who coached her, who shaped her discipline, who was there from the beginning. Gone. Just like that. For most people, that kind of loss stops everything. But Mitchell? She kept playing, kept showing up, kept scoring, kept carrying herself like nothing had changed, even though everything had. And that same season, the Fever finally broke through. The playoff drought ended. And standing next to her was a rookie who was flipping the entire league upside down, Caitlin Clark. That's when everything shifted. Not just for the league, but for Indiana. And for Mitchell. Because for the first time in years, she wasn't carrying alone. Clark's vision. Boston's presence. A young core that didn't just have talent but belief. And suddenly, those empty arenas? Gone. That quiet rebuild? Turned into the most talked about story in women's basketball. And through all of it, Mitchell was still there. Still the anchor. Still the constant. Still the one who never left when leaving would have been easier. So when she says this decision was about family, this isn't branding. This isn't PR. This is someone who lived through the worst years and finally sees something worth holding on to. Something worth sacrificing for. Because make no mistake, this was a sacrifice. She could have taken longer deals. More security. More guarantees. Other teams were ready. But she chose 1 year.
One. Why?
Because this isn't just about now. It's about what's coming next. The new WNBA financial system has changed everything. Salary caps have exploded. Supermax deals are rewriting careers. Players are finally being paid what they deserve. And in the middle of all that change, Indiana is building something incredibly tight. Mitchell.
Boston. Clark.
3 cornerstone players. All trending toward massive contracts. All needing space under the same cap. That math. It doesn't work unless someone adjusts. Unless someone thinks bigger than themselves. Unless someone chooses timing over security. Mitchell did. And, behind the scenes, this wasn't random. This alignment started long before the contract. In off-season gyms. In quiet conversations. Away from cameras. Players talking about legacy. About staying together. About building something that lasts. Not just chasing individual success, but creating something that can't be replicated. So no, this wasn't just a $1, $4 million deal. This wasn't just a headline. This was a veteran who had every reason to leave, choosing to stay. Not because she had to, but because she believed. In the people. In the plan. In what this team could become. And if they're right, if this gamble works, then this won't be remembered as a contract. It'll be remembered as the moment everything truly began. And then something happened that most people overlooked, but it might have been the most important moment of all. Caitlin Clark didn't just support Kelsey Mitchell behind closed doors. She said it out loud.
Publicly. Clearly.
No hesitation. She called Mitchell the backcourt engine of the Indiana Fever. Not a compliment. A declaration. And more importantly, a signal. Because in professional sports, when a franchise player says something like that, it's never just about praise. It's about priority. It's about who matters when decisions get difficult. It's about who the organization is quietly choosing to build around. And Mitchell heard it. You can tell by the way she responded. Not with ego. Not with leverage. Not with the kind of language players usually use when they know their value has skyrocketed. Instead, she said something that didn't sound like modern free agency at all. She talked about making it make sense. She talked about wanting to stay together. She talked about us. Not me. Not mine. Not my deal.
Us.
And that's where this entire story starts to separate itself from everything else happening in the league right now. Because free agency today? It's a marketplace.
Cold.
Calculated. Strategic. Maximize value. Test the market. Leverage demand. That's how it works. That's how it's supposed to work. But Mitchell's decision? It doesn't behave like that. It feels older, rarer, almost uncomfortable in a system built on constant movement. It feels like commitment. And that's what makes what's happening inside Indiana so dangerous. Because this isn't just about one player anymore. This is about something you almost never see in modern professional sports. A real culture forming in real time. Not the kind teams talk about in press conferences. Not the kind you manufacture, with slogans. The kind that forms when players choose each other. Look at what Caitlin Clark has actually done since arriving. Yes, the numbers are ridiculous. Yes, the highlights are everywhere. Yes, the attention is unprecedented. But that's not the most important part. The most important part is how she fit. Because this was supposed to be complicated. A young superstar walking into a locker room where Kelsey Mitchell had been the face for years. That situation? It usually ends one way. Tension. Ego clashes. Unspoken resentment. A veteran who carried the team through the worst years, suddenly watching a rookie take the spotlight, the endorsements, the headlines. It's one of the oldest fractures in sports. And it almost always breaks something. But not here. Because Clark did something rare. She didn't try to rise above the team. She embedded herself inside it. She celebrated her teammates loudly. She deflected credit constantly. She made it clear, over and over again, that this wasn't her team. It was their team.
And Mitchell?
She didn't resist it. She didn't protect her territory. She didn't push back against the shift. She embraced it, not as a threat, but as the missing piece. The one thing she had been waiting for through years of losing. And when you watch them play together, it becomes obvious. This isn't just chemistry. It's alignment. They don't just coexist, they amplify each other. Clark's vision creates space most players never even see. Mitchell's scoring punishes defenses the moment they hesitate. One stretches the floor, the other collapses it. And somewhere in between, the game opens up in ways that don't show up in a box score. Timing,
Trust.
instinct, the kind of connection you can't fake, and you definitely can't build overnight. Then you add Aaliyah Boston into that equation. And everything changes again. Because now you don't just have talent. You have balance. A core that covers every dimension of the game. And more importantly, a core that has already shown it's willing to sacrifice for itself. Boston takes less early. Mitchell takes shorter security. Clark elevates everyone without demanding control. 3 different players. 3 different decisions. 1 shared direction. And that's the part nobody can replicate. You can match contracts. You can build facilities. You can hire elite coaches. But you cannot manufacture buy-in. You cannot force players to choose each other. Which brings us to the bigger question. Is this sustainable? Because history says, probably not. This is the moment every great team eventually reaches. Where belief collides with reality. Where loyalty runs into the hard limits of a salary cap. Where keeping everyone becomes impossible. And that moment, it's coming. Because the league is changing faster than ever. Money is exploding. Opportunities are multiplying. Expectations are rising. And with that, pressure. So now the question isn't what the Indiana Fever are building. That part is clear. The question is, how long can they hold it together? Because eventually something has to give. A contract, a role, a sacrifice that becomes too big. And when that moment arrives, it won't be theoretical anymore. It'll be personal. Who stays? Who adjusts? Who becomes the piece that has to move so everything else can remain? Because every era in sports ends the same way. Not with failure, but with a decision. A moment where everything you built gets tested by the reality of what it costs to keep it. And maybe that's what makes Mitchell's decisions so powerful. Because she didn't just sign a contract. She made a bet. On people. On timing. On something bigger than herself. Now the only question left is this. When that bet finally meets reality, will it still hold? Or will this be remembered not as the start of something lasting, but the moment before everything changed forever? And here's where the story takes a turn most people aren't ready for. Because what looks like unity right now, what feels like loyalty, what sounds like a perfect alignment of stars, has a hidden cost. And that cost hasn't shown up yet. Right now, everything is easy. Winning is starting to happen. The spotlight is growing. The chemistry feels natural. Caitlin Clark is elevating the entire league. Kelsey Mitchell is finally getting the recognition she earned years ago. Aaliyah Boston is anchoring the future. This is the phase everyone loves. The rise.
The belief.
The idea that maybe, just maybe, this is different. But dynasties aren't tested during the rise, they're tested when pressure replaces potential. And that moment is coming faster than people think. Because here's the reality no one wants to say out loud. You cannot keep everyone forever, not in a salary cap system. Not in a league where values are skyrocketing. Not when every player in your core is becoming more valuable by the month. Right now, the Indiana Fever feel like a perfect equation. But soon, that equation is going to break. Think about what's ahead. Caitlin Clark is on a trajectory that doesn't just demand a max contract. It demands the contract. The kind that reshapes how teams build rosters entirely. At the same time, Aaliyah Boston is already tied into a historic deal. And Mitchell? She just took a 1-year gamble. A decision that looks selfless now but will force a massive choice later. Because 1 year from now, everything resets. And when it does, the emotions won't matter. The memories won't matter. Even the loyalty might not matter. Only the math will. And this is where great teams either evolve or collapse. Because when the time comes to decide who gets paid, who waits, who sacrifices again, those conversations don't feel like unity anymore. They feel like pressure. They feel like risk. They feel like choosing between people you don't want to choose between. And that's when everything changes. Right now, Mitchell's decision feels like leadership, like belief, like the foundation of something special. But what if it's also a countdown? Because by choosing a short-term deal, she didn't just help the team. She accelerated the timeline. She pushed the biggest decisions closer. She made the future arrive faster than expected. And when that future hits, there are no easy answers. Do you pay the superstar what she deserves even if it means losing depth? Do you keep the core together even if it limits flexibility? Do you ask the same players to sacrifice again even if they've already given enough? These aren't basketball questions anymore. These are identity questions. Because this team has built itself on something rare: trust, sacrifice, shared purpose. But those things are hardest to maintain when the stakes get real. And the stakes are about to become very real. Because the moment the Indiana Fever stop being a story and start being a contender, everything changes. Expectations replace patience. Criticism replaces optimism. Every loss gets magnified. Every decision gets questioned. And suddenly, the same chemistry that feels effortless now has to survive pressure, money, and reality all at once. That's when we find out what this really is. Is this just a perfect moment? A rare alignment that looks unstoppable until the business side catches up? Or is this something stronger? Something built deep enough to survive the exact storm that destroys most teams? Because history is full of teams that felt just like this. Close. Connected. Certain they had something special. Until they didn't. And that's what makes this situation so fascinating. Because for once, the players seem aware of it. They're not just reacting. They're planning. They're choosing. They're trying to get ahead of the moment that usually breaks teams apart. And maybe that's the difference. Maybe this isn't the calm before everything falls apart. Maybe this is the beginning of something that actually holds. Or maybe this is exactly how it always feels right before reality steps in. Because in the end, this isn't just about contracts. It's not just about basketball. It's about whether belief can survive a system designed to test it. And when that test finally comes, we're going to find out something the entire league is watching closely. Was this the start of a new blueprint? Or just another story that looked unbreakable until it wasn't? And now we've reached the part of the story nobody can predict. Not the analysts. Not the front office. Not even the players themselves. Because everything up to this point, it's been belief. From here on out, it becomes proof. Because sooner or later, this stops being about potential and starts being about results. The Indiana Fever are no longer a feel-good story. They're no longer rebuilding. They're no longer waiting. With Caitlin Clark, Kelsey Mitchell, and Aaliyah Boston all aligned, they've crossed into a different category entirely. Expectation. And expectation changes everything. Because now it's not enough to be close. It's not enough to be exciting. It's not enough to build.
Now,
you have to win. And winning is where the pressure really begins. Because here's the truth most people don't talk about. Chemistry is easy when you're chasing something. It's much harder when you're supposed to have it already. When every game matters. When every possession is analyzed. When every mistake is amplified. That's when relationships get tested. That's when leadership gets real. And that's when we find out what this core actually is. Because on paper, it's perfect. A generational playmaker. An elite scorer. A dominant interior presence. 3 pieces that should fit. 3 players who believe in each other. 3 contracts that somehow have aligned for now. But basketball isn't played on paper. It's played in moments. Late in games. Under pressure. When roles tighten and decisions get sharper. Who takes the last shot? Who sacrifices touches? Who steps back so someone else can step forward? These are the moments that define teams. And sometimes they divide them. Because belief is powerful. But belief without results? It starts to crack. And the scary part? That crack doesn't happen all at once. It happens slowly, quietly. A missed opportunity here, a tough loss there, a question that lingers just a little too long. Until one day, someone asks the question nobody wants to hear. Is this actually working? And when that question shows up, everything changes. Because now it's not just about staying together. It's about whether staying together is enough. And that's the crossroads every great team faces. Do you trust